You're listening to UConn Sports Nation, presented by ThisIsUConnCountry.com, where you'll find the latest news, game previews, and recruiting when it comes to UConn football. To talk about UConn to the Big East and the impacts of that this will have to UConn football, I'm joined by Nicole Auerbach of The Athletic. Nicole, good Monday morning to you.
Good Monday morning back to you.
So there were rumors about this move for quite some time with UConn and the Big East. Obviously, the history there speaks for itself. When you heard that this actually became official, what was your reaction?
Yeah, I'm still surprised. Again, mostly because of the football question. I mean, from the basketball standpoint, men's and women's basketball makes total sense. The benefits of decreasing travel costs across the board because you're closer to your member schools, all of that made total sense to me. But it was interesting because, we're talking about an athletic program that basically was kind of the biggest loser of the last round of realignment and was really left out of all the big moves to the ACC, to the Big Ten, to places like that. So no, it doesn't surprise me that after a few years of really seeing what the Big East Conference, what the new Big East looked like, and what it, that it was feasible to have this conference that focused on basketball, highlighted basketball, made sense. But from a standpoint of just how much money had gone into football and how big a driver football has been for so many moves for conference realignment, overall, that part really surprised me, and especially because as much as there had been rumors, as much as, it made sense, clearly this happened in a really quick way that a lot of the big fundamental questions related to football were not able to be answered before the announcement that this was happening for basically the rest of the sports.
Yeah, and that path forward seems to be, and Athletic Director David Benedict has indicated football independence is that route. The viability of an independent football program in this day and age, obviously Notre Dame and BYU have the clout to be successful. UConn going down this route, maybe scheduling-wise lies somewhere in between where BYU can pull some games and the University of Massachusetts, for example. Just the viability of football independence in your mind in this day and age of college football.
I mean, that's the million-dollar question. More than million-dollar question. But it's going to be really interesting, and I really keep looking at UMass's schedule and the way UMass is doing this. And you're right that it's somewhere in between that and BYU, but we don't quite know exactly. We don't know, if they have regional TV network support or ESPN support, what that necessarily can open up. And we still don't know 100% for sure if 2020 is going to be that first season of independence, and if so, how do you fill those eight spots open right now? And the problem with independence, the biggest challenge from a scheduling standpoint, is October and November. I mean, you got to think about the time of the year where everyone else is in conference play. I mean, I think, the concerns about who UConn can schedule, you have David Benedict going and saying that he's already been approached by schools that their fan base would be interested in. To me, I have been told that the appealing schools and the way to go here would be other schools in the Northeast, which makes total sense, and they already tried to schedule schools like that. And other ACC schools, there's familiarity there, there's name recognition. Potentially there's going to be like a more equivalent, football product with some of those maybe mid-tier, ACC teams. And, you've already got the bye game against Clemson. You're going to have to do some bye games in there as well. But it's really just the question is how do you schedule October, November? And if you look at UMass's schedule, which again is kind of what I'm looking at as a model right now, just because, they had a couple years notice, and I just want to see what types of schools they're scheduling. It's a lot of other independents like Liberty, Army, BYU. Late in the year, they do have Northwestern in November, and they also have UConn in the midpoint of the season as well, ironically. And so I guess that's the way you're going to have to do it. But the question really is just like, if you have to do this for basically 1 year from now, I just don't know how you physically do that. And so, if you can survive that, and then, you have a little bit of a lead-up time on some of the other scheduling, already have some home and homes against some ACC teams, this is doable. But again, what are the goals? What are the figures you want to reach? What are the win totals you want to reach? Obviously, you want to be, making bowl games and things like that. But I'm curious kind of what that time frame is going to look like to see, okay, is FCS independence working, or are we going to need to think about going down to FCS? And I'm sure there's going to be a time frame of how many years they're going to give this a shot, but that is always going to be a question in the back of their minds about FCS. And I know they're not thinking about that now, but they're going to have to, and I would think, if it were me, I would think on an annual basis at the end of the season, like what worked, what didn't, and do we need to, think about these fundamental questions.
Yeah, and certainly 14 months from now is the start of the 2020 season. So to your point, scheduling that 2020 season, if you're an actual independent, you need 8 conference games. Now, or 8 additional games. Now, David Benedict said his first order of business is talking to Commissioner Mike Oresco. Clearly, that's to indicate and confirm when exactly and negotiate that UConn's exit from the AAC does take place as soon as possible. Basketball-wise, they clearly want to get in there for 2020. Maybe there's a possible route where they can stick on for one additional year from the AAC, although Commissioner Mike Oresco has been very vocal about UConn's departure, right?
Yeah, I think that's one thing, that really struck me about kind of, again, to speak to how quickly some of this came together. It struck me that, at the press conference announcing the move to the Big East and all the celebrations, all the welcome back signs at Madison Square Garden last week, you asked all the football questions, which obviously people didn't want to focus on because they were excited. But you ask these questions, and you have David Benedict, you have other officials saying, we want to talk to Mike Oresco and the American about staying on as a football-only member. And I've been comparing it all week in radio interviews with friends or whatever. It's basically like, I'm dumping this guy, but I want him to continue to take me out to 5-star restaurants and pay for me. Like, that wasn't going to happen, and that wasn't feasible. And I get that they were, maybe it's a long shot hope that would be possible. But it wasn't going to happen. But the fact that you have officials saying it, talking about it, saying that that's something they're going to talk about with Mike Oresco, and then turn around 2 hours later and, I get a call from Mike Oresco, talk to him, he's like, absolutely no, there's no way they're keeping UConn on as a football-only member. And again, like, UConn can try to make independence work, but just that disconnect there of, like, maybe you really don't think there's a chance, but to say, we're going to talk to them, we're hopeful that maybe we can do this, and it just not be a possibility at all. Like, these are all things that could have been worked out on the front end if it wasn't rushed, and if it, and you have to do things in a certain way, especially in realignment. But there were just so many loose ends around football that were not tied up before this all happened, which I think contributes to the perception that this move really was not about football. Football is such an aspect, not a priority at UConn. And then you have this narrative that UConn is, like, giving up on football. And all that it has to do with the way this all happened, obviously the choice of the league, but even just kind of how all these loose ends that were not tied up and not addressed leading into the announcement.
Yeah, and it's definitely disconcerting for those fans in here of the football program at UConn. The Board of Trustees meeting, there was a fan or two that stood in front of the board and said pretty much exactly what you said. This is a rushed decision. Clearly, football is being put on the back burner. There's no plan in place. What's the plan? And there was really no response from the Board of Trustees or the administration. Clearly, they can't talk about things if they don't know the exact route. But to your point, yes, rushed decision, disconcerting for football fans here in the state. Now, one area that I want to see if you have any feedback on is, do you think Fox Sports was a pusher in this move and somebody working behind the scenes to spark this deal? And have you heard any indications that Fox Sports, owners of the Big East television rights, are potentially working to help UConn from an independent scheduling standpoint?
So I have not heard that. I have not poked around specifically on that either. And it is actually kind of interesting because I feel like, at that press conference at the Garden last week, and then just kind of overall, there's been a lot of talk about media partners in UConn. And, understandably, UConn is located very close to ESPN. You have relationships with SNY and Fox now, and things that you're hoping will help UConn in some way. These are people that you have conversations with throughout the year and are involved in media rights packages and things. And the question would be, I guess, if they would get involved. These are not things typically that people, from the media companies get involved in, like helping with scheduling, but could they bring them alone? It's all possible. And like I said, especially if they're going to need to fill spots for 2020, they're going to need all the help they can get. But to my knowledge, I've not heard anything specifically about Fox. But like I said, even if this type of relationship and these types of maneuverings did happen and they are unusual, again, UConn's going to need all the help they can get on the football side for media partnerships, for anything to bring in revenue. And so, even if it is unusual, I'm sure they will entertain whatever possible avenues to help.
Now, moving forward, conference realignment is something that's likely going to continue down the line. Do you think there's any chance that UConn maybe took control of their own destiny, so to speak, and there's other schools out there currently in UConn's situation that made conference realignment decisions based on football that had a negative impact across their athletic departments as a whole, whether it's travel, whether it's moving away from rivalries that existed in the old alignment, and the decisions they made for football going forward really don't fit those schools. Do you think UConn maybe might be ahead of their time a little bit in this forward-thinking model, or do you think this was a move solely just that UConn's going to make and other schools may not even consider this down the line?
Well, I don't necessarily know that other schools will have a similar option with such an obvious fit and history that they are rejoining, and from a basketball standpoint with their marquee sports. I'm not sure that necessarily everyone will have that option. And again, even with UConn, like I said earlier, before this happened, you would have said, looking at that latest big round of realignment, that UConn was the one left out because UConn prioritized football, couldn't join the basketball-only league. They did not have any members that had FBS football. That even the way that we covered the new Big East was, is this going to work when you're not a football league? And it is. And you have like-minded members and institutions that can, come together and prioritize basketball in the way that they want. So it makes sense. And I do think, in a few years, I know we've already kind of reflected on some, like let's say West Virginia, travel costs across all sports for the Big 12. There are a lot of things that when you look back and the scramble and the fear of being left out, the fear of being the last one in a sinking ship of a league, people are making a lot of movements that I think, we'll all look back at some of these and be like, like that, some of that didn't make sense. This does make sense for UConn to come back. The question is just, what about football? Are you just acknowledging that it's the driver there? Do you just drop it down? Did you already think some billions of dollars into it because you thought that football was the key to, making sure you're in good standing, making sure you're in a good league moving forward? It's just so hard to tell. So I think, outside of those questions related to that one sport, and you obviously you have players, you have a coaching staff, you have recruits that are being talked to. There's a lot of people involved in that decision. Outside of that, it makes total sense. But I don't necessarily think, let's say if we're going to talk about West Virginia and the travel, and how, just that whole thing came to be about because, they wanted a spot. Everyone was leaving the old Big East. Does that, how does that impact, how does that change? Can they go back somewhere else? I don't think they want to. I don't think that's something they're entertaining. I don't know what league would be that fit. So I don't think that everyone else who's, made different moves or maybe were left out, like some of these other members of the Americans, they're in better stance now because the league is different in the way that we talked about it 7 years ago, and it was kind of just the afterthoughts and the teams that had gotten not picked by the ACC, not picked by the Big 12. It was just kind of this conglomeration of teams. So everything is kind of shifted. But even some of these other independents that, have stayed independent or might want to be, they don't necessarily have a push to join leagues. They don't necessarily have to, be a football-only member in this or a basketball-only member in that. Everyone has kind of shifted and tried to prioritize, the main sport. This is just one of the first times we're seeing a school that really sunk, a lot of millions of dollars into football kind of really do a hard 90-degree turn. and say that maybe that was the wrong path. But again, I mean, how few schools and athletic departments even have, that safety net, essentially, of returning to a league that you are synonymous with that prioritizes your two best sports. I mean, no one else really has the opportunity that UConn did.
Yeah. And then finally, I want to switch gears a little to the national stage. Believe it or not, I think it's only 8 Saturdays until we kick off the college football season 2019. You had an article out recently regarding transfers and transfer rules and potentially what's changing in that regard. Your thoughts on the transfer process? Obviously, it's created sort of this free agent model, so to speak, in college athletics. For those not familiar that haven't read the article, what exactly is changing in the transfer realm, and what else were you able to report on in that area?
Yeah. So it's basically it's changing and tweaking the language and kind of the requirements and the documentation tied to immediate eligibility waivers. And those are the controversial things. That's kind of been the big talking point this offseason, because that's Tate Martell getting one from Ohio State to Miami, and Justin Fields getting one Georgia to Ohio State. And so it was this loophole, essentially, that was created last April in 2018 that allowed people to get this immediate eligibility. Essentially, if their previous school will kind of corroborate some details or read, it's their new school about, the circumstances of their departure. And, the perception, though, when you have really high-profile quarterbacks doing this, and Shea Patterson now at Michigan from Ole Miss is kind of the pioneer on this front. When you have, starting quarterbacks at Michigan, Ohio State, and Miami all getting to play right away after transferring, it creates this perception that these waivers are given out to anybody, or especially anybody who flares up. And so the tweak is basically just trying to make it a little bit more difficult for those waivers to get approved. I mean, it kind of just outlines specific documentation related to the different types of reasons you might be transferring. For example, if you're transferring to be near a sick relative, are you going to be specifically involved in the caregiving process? And it's kind of just specific documentation related to that, or an athletic director needing to kind of sign off on the fact that you're being run off your team, which, people are not necessarily sure people are going to do. But, it's not a drastic change, but it's just trying to kind of at least push back against the perception that everyone's getting these things, but just making it a little bit more difficult. And the transfer issue is something that just everyone cannot get their hands wrapped around right now, because there's just no consensus on, should everyone get a one-time immediate eligibility transfer. One time you can go, it basically is free agency, you can start right away. Coaches are making millions of dollars, they can coach right away. Players should have that. Or, then you have the camp of everyone who wants everyone to sit for a full year. Give them a year on the back end. You have different varying views on grad transfers. There's just so many issues that end up in gridlock in the NCAA and members right now, that it's so hard to see a more drastic change than just, again, tweaking this language to be a little bit more difficult for the players right now. We'll see how that changes, but there's been a lot of transfer working groups over the last 10 years that really have not been able to get their hands around this issue. And so right now, the most that we can address and we can change is basically this tiny little waiver and this tiny little piece of the overall transfer rules. And we'll see what that does. But essentially, one administrator put it to me, it's kind of just the pendulum swinging back in one direction after last year kind of swung in the direction of being a little bit more player-friendly.
All right, Nicole, really appreciate your time to give a little national perspective on the UConn move, some happenings this offseason in college football, and really appreciate your time. Enjoy the 4th, and maybe give the fans a chance where they can find you on social media.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm just on Twitter at Nicole Auerbach, AUERBACH.
You're listening to UConn Sports Nation, presented by ThisIsUConnCountry.com, where you'll find the latest news, game previews, and recruiting when it comes to UConn football.